At the end of the 18th century, the Comanche are in control of a vast territory in the southern plains known as Comancheria. War is their way of life. Courage, stealth, ruthlessness determine a Comanche's rank and status in the tribe. Warriors fight for glory, loot, captives, and to preserve their hunting grounds. To fight their enemies, the Comanche master a variety of deadly weapons that include the lance, the bow and arrow, and the war club. The head of the war club could be a stone or even flint, chipped to a razor's edge. It weighed only a few pounds, but gave the brave an effective weapon for close combat.
You see, sometimes people coming over this way, many of the war clubs were mostly swung this way, on the side. If you hit a person right, you could probably kill, but most of the time you probably won't. Will probably just injure or hurt the person.
The lance, like a spear, was good for hunting and battle. Long lances were used to strike at buffalo. Shorter lances were easier to handle in combat. At first, the points were chipped from flint or stone. Later, when the Comanches came into contact with white traders, they made lance heads from scrap metal, sharpened to a deadly point. But the weapon of choice for the Comanche warrior was the bow and arrow.
The Comanche warrior, as a boy, grew up with the bow. As young warriors, young children, they were given games to play, little bows and arrows for them to always be around. So that's what made them expert shots with the bow. They were so good at it, they could shoot birds from the air.
The bow is made from ash or hickory, and its string is animal sinew. It's short, so it can be fired more easily from horseback. The arrows are crafted from the branch of a chokecherry bush. And like the lance, early arrow points were cut from stone, then later from sharpened metal.
And many of the arrows were also personalized. It had a marking of some certain type. You know, for instance, maybe a line marking that is put on there. It means that that is for that individual warrior. That is his arrow.
We know that it would bring down a bison. That's a combination of skill between the horse, the rider, and the bow, but it would bring down a 2,000 to 4,000 pound bull. That's a pretty effective weapon.
Beginning in the late 1700s, the Comanche start trading with French fur trappers for flintlock muskets in exchange for buffalo hides. But the white man's weapons don't live up to the Comanche's expectations.
They gave up guns by about 1800 because, remember, we're talking single-shot muskets. And they found that their ability with the bow and arrow was much more deadly than firearms.
Invincible on horseback, the Comanche hold off all invaders. By the end of the 18th century, they are known as the Lords of the Southern Plains. But in the late 1800s, strangers enter Comanche lands. These are not hostile hunting parties or raiders from other tribes. These are white people with plans to stay.
Whatever kind of people it was that was willing to take their wagon out into Comanche country and try to start a home, try to start a farm, those were brave people.
At first, the settlers are of little concern to the Comanche. There are so few of them, their rifles slow to load, and their horses are inferior. And even when the first American Army troops arrive in Comanche territory in 1834, they pose no real threat.
At that time, the United States policy was very much towards peace with the Indians. This land out there was a great American desert. Washington was perfectly willing to let the Indians have this. For years, American troops were never allowed to go into Indian territory, even in reprisal.
But as soon as Texas declares independence from Mexico in 1836, the trickle of settlers hungry for land turns into a flood. This is an outrage to a tribe which considers the land a gift to them. In tribal councils, Comanche bands come together and decide the new immigrants must go. On May 19, 1836, a Comanche war party approaches the settlement of John Parker and his family. The Parkers and a few other groups are preparing their crop on this quiet patch of central Texas. The women and children watch cautiously. Suddenly, the men are speared and scalped. The warriors then quickly chase after the others. Parker's granddaughter, Cynthia Ann, is captured, along with 2 women and 2 other children. Indians know that settlers will pay a high price for the safe return of their kinfolk. The other women and children are eventually ransomed, but young Cynthia Ann disappears with the Comanche. News of the Parker raid spreads like wildfire. Back east, newspapers cover the story in lurid detail. Soon the horrible stories of Comanche raids and captures are everywhere.
My 5 hours with the Comanches, my 2 weeks with the Comanches. This was popular reading. This was drugstore comic book literature at the time, and so sometimes it's hard to tell how much of it's for real.
But the threat is very real, and settlers in the new Republic of Texas demand that something be done about the Comanche.
It was a very bad start for both peoples, particularly the Texans. You have to remember, early 19th century Americans, and certainly frontiers people, did not tolerate easily their women folk being massacred. So what you had almost from the very start was blood feud.
Hundreds of young settlers, armed and ready for a fight, join a brand new ragtag militia known as the Texas Rangers.
Most of these Rangers, they were frontier bred, good at horsemanship, and who naturally also did not like Indians very much. There were not many humanitarians among the Texas Rangers.
At first, the Rangers have little more on their side than killer instinct. It's not enough to defeat a people bred for war.
The Ranger bands were small, almost always outnumbered. Therefore, they found the best defense was to build a legend, be very brutal, and to attack. And they developed tactics exactly like that.
Among the first Rangers to do this is John Coffee Hayes. Slim, small, and refined. Hayes doesn't look like the image of the tough Texas Ranger, but looks can be deceiving. Nicknamed Devil Jack, Hayes is smart, strong, and absolutely fearless.
What was said about Hayes was by one of the Tonkawa scouts. He said, "I'm not afraid to go to hell, with my buddies. Jack Hayes not afraid to go to hell by himself."
With thousands of settlers staking claims on their ancestral land and facing more and more attacks from vengeful Rangers, the Comanche decide to act. In February 1840, Comanche leaders ride into San Antonio to negotiate a peaceful coexistence. But what happens instead is a bloodbath. 5. A delegation of